Okay, our next presenter is coming in via Zoom too. Siobhan Murray has the best job title of all the panelists, in my opinion. Siobhan is a burnout strategist. What does that mean? Well, we'll find out. She's also a psychotherapist with a lot of background in counseling and psychotherapy. And as well as that, she's an author of the best-selling book, The Burnout Solution. Okay, so Siobhan gives advice to, hello Siobhan, we can see you on screen, nice to see you. Siobhan gives advice and consultancy around how to manage these questions of resilience, well-being, resourcefulness within teams. And that's what she's going to talk about today. I want to pick out something in particular from Siobhan's bio. She was a consultant expert in the 2018 Irish television documentary series Stressed, which examined the impact of burnout on the body. I hope you'll talk a little bit about that, Siobhan, today. The show, it obviously touched a nerve. Irish people must be very stressed because the show was the highest rated science series in Irish television history. Yeah, and Siobhan likes to engage the public in questions of resourcefulness, resilience, and well-being through the media, and in fact has many media appearances right across the globe. Okay, Siobhan, we're leaving maybe 5 minutes for questions at the end of your presentation. You have about 50 minutes. Please keep an eye on the clock there. Just to say, the title of Siobhan's presentation is Twisting the Jar. Intrigued? Well, we'll find out where that came from during our presentation. But for now, Siobhan, it's over to you.
Oh, thank you so much. What a introduction. And it's lovely to join you via Zoom. I feel like I can see myself on loads of different screens on my screen. But before I go any further, and you've had such an informative morning, I've been listening from my desk. I'm blown away by the knowledge that's been shared in the conversations. And I know you've had a breakout room, and I know you've had a little bit of a bathroom break, but I wanted to bring you all back into just centering yourselves. Now, even before I go any further from that, this is not going to be 50 minutes of let's all take our shoes off, stand on the grass, hug a tree, and we're all going to feel better. The reality in well-being and wellness is sometimes it's tough and sometimes it's hard work. And I really want you to keep that in mind when I go through my presentation. And I, by all means, if there's any questions that you have throughout, if anything resonates with you, stick it in the chat box. If you see me looking down to my right, I'm just keeping an eye on my phone to make sure that there's no technical issues. So again, I apologize for that from coming remotely. The reason my company is called Twisting the Jar, I wanted to tell you just a tiny little story about why it's called Twisting the Jar. When I was about 5, my mum was about 32, an absolutely phenomenal lady. She's 76 now. She popped into an art gallery exhibition in Dublin last night. She's just had her booster. She's incredible. But when I was about 5, she was 32. She went to work one day in an ad agency and she had a brain hemorrhage. She was taken into hospital. She stayed there for about 6 months. She did recover from her brain hemorrhage, but she was always left slightly weaker on her left side. It took a long time for her to build up the strength, the emotional strength, the physical strength. She actually, and I have full permission to share this story, shortly after she left hospital, after about 6 months, she was back at home. We were living with my grandmother, her mother, and she ended up having a nervous breakdown. And this is really interesting. So she had physically got the movement and the strength back to a certain level in her left side, but emotionally, she was still very traumatized. And even back then, there wasn't that emphasis put on the emotional strength that needed to be worked on for her to get back to where she had been prior to this happening. So she spent a couple of months in St. Michael's. I think that's probably one of the most traumatic parts of all of this story. But she came out of there, and through her resilience, and I will talk a little bit about that and what it actually means, not in the sense of in a work capacity, but in a real life capacity. But she got herself together. She was a single mum, and we roll on a good few years. I'm a teenager, and her and I are living together in this little flat in Rathmines in Dublin. And she was in the throes of setting up one of the first employment agencies in this country back in the 1980s. And for those of you that are too young to remember then, that was a recession that really knocked the socks off this country. For those that are old enough to remember, you'll understand. You'd open our fridge, and in our fridge there was always a packet of McCambridge's brown bread and a block of cheese. And that was the extent of our fridge. There was no massive big grocery shop. Things weren't on tap. There was no ordering online the way there is now. But this particular day, Mum and I were in the kitchen, and she was making spaghetti bolognese, and she was trying to twist the jar open. And remember, she's still, even now, slightly weaker on her left side, and she didn't have the power to twist the jar open. So she turned around to me and she said, will you twist the jar open? Now, here's the thing. There are loads of ways to twist the jar open. You can stab it on the top with a knife and it will release the pressure. You can run it underwater. You can knock it in temper off the side of the counter. You can use a rubber glove. And more often than not, that's what we do. We do it ourselves. We put ourselves under pressure that we keep on doing things that maybe we're not able to do right there and then for whatever reasons. But what my mum did is she asked for help with one component of what she was doing. She didn't go, I can't twist the jar open, therefore I can't finish cooking dinner, I can't provide for my daughter, I can't. She didn't go into that negative thought spiral. She simply asked for help in one area of what she was doing in order to be able to complete the project. Now, if we apply that into our normal lives, and we know when to ask for help, not to put our hands up and go, oh, I can't do that, but just to go, I need help right now. And that's what twisting the jar is about. Twisting the jar is about empowering people to know when to ask for help, how to ask for help, and what to do in order to be able to focus on what they do best. So, as I said, the positive outcome of this story is Mum is phenomenal. One of these days, I'm actually going to bring her in to the first part of one of my webinars and go, look, here she is. She's a real life person. This is not a made up story. So twisting the jar, throughout the course of this and over the weekend, just think about how you can utilize that story into what you need to ask for help for in order to be able to focus on what you do best. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. This is a two-step process because I have to go into this, click share, and then ask it to do slideshow, which will probably kick me out. And then I have to click back in again. So 1 second. Here we go. So work reset. I've just given it this title, but really it was all about twisting the jar. And I've got it. It's working. Fabulous. So very quickly, yes, I'm a burnout strategist and a mental health trainer. And I'm also, bizarrely enough, a couple of years ago, I certified as a personal trainer because I also wanted to understand the importance of why is it so beneficial for us to exercise. And I will talk about exercise as part of your 4 pillars. Pre-pandemic, I wrote the book, The Burnout Solution, and who would have thought how relevant it would have become, especially over the last 18 months. And believe me, when I wrote the book and the research that I was doing and the stories that are in there, that people who had come to me who were experiencing burnout, that was huge already. So it didn't take a pandemic for people to get burnt out. All that it has done is created an environment where we're able to talk about it and people are able to go, yes, this is happening to me. And I'm going to mention this now because I will touch on burnout further through the presentation. In 2019, the World Health Organization classified burnout as an occupational phenomenon. And I think all of this is really interesting in light of the fact of the remote working, because therefore what they were saying in 2019 was that burnout happened when you went, that physical, when you went to work. So for the vast majority of us today, we have not been going to work, yet we have been experiencing or know people who have been experiencing burnout. So therefore, I dispute that. I take on the World Health Organization and I dispute the fact that it is purely an occupational phenomenon. It is also not classified as a medical condition. And when that happened in 2019, I remember for a couple of days, I was a little bit perturbed by that. And I thought, no, it needs to be, we need that validation. Actually, I am very happy it is not classified as a medical condition. Now, there are lots of strains and there's lots of components of burnout that do fall under medical areas. But if we view burnout as a medical condition and not seeing it as the way to manage, prevent and recover is through lifestyle changes, then people are just going to think if I pop a pill, I'm going to be okay. And that is not the way we are going to manage this. I'm going to jump to the bottom of this a little bit. And before I got my degree in counselling and psychotherapy, I worked in many different fields. I worked in the music industry. I've worked for Sir Elton John. I've worked in corporate. I was head of communications for McDonald's restaurants. I set up the Ronald McDonald Children's Charity in Ireland and helped to fundraise for the money for the Ronald House that's at Crumlin Hospital. So I've worked in so many varying different areas. And I used all of that when I got my degree in counselling and psychotherapy about 10 years ago. I then went on and became a master practitioner in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. I certified as a mediator and I do a small amount of mediation, but I completely concur that mediation is, and I say small amount because prior to COVID, I would have done in person and I struggled with bringing that online. Interesting, I didn't struggle as much with bringing my other parts of my work online, but I think with mediation, it is such an emotive between two different parties that you really do need to have them in the room. So I'm currently studying a HDIP in the Royal College of Surgeons in positive health, lifestyle medicine, because I really want you to understand throughout the course of this, everything I speak about, there is research to back up why it is so important for us to look after ourselves. This is not, as I said earlier, let's all go out and hug a tree, or, I do a little bit of wellness on a Sunday for half an hour, I walk the dog. This has to become part of who we are as much as brushing our teeth is every single day. So, going to go through this. We're going to redefining the workplace. We're going to talk about that. And this has been touched on already. We're going to talk about burnout basics, burnout 2021, and ultimately burnout 2022. Your 4 pillars, which is really important. And a couple of little hacks in there. So remote working, wouldn't this be fabulous if this is what we all had as our genuine backdrop and not a Zoom click a button backdrop or a Google Hangout or a Teams, that we had this lush greenery behind us. And, that would be fabulous. But that is not our reality. It has been very different. What happened in last year, 18, 19 months ago, we were told, grab your laptop and run for the hills. There was no pre-warning. There was no, over the course of the next 18 months, we are going to take on a remote working initiative. It was literally one day we were here in our offices and the next we were at home. And through all of that, remember, your cortisol levels were flying through the roof. And as much as people will say, yeah, but we're used to it now, our cortisol levels are still under massive stress right now. Now, we heard even with the Vox Pop, there have been positives in remote working, and equally there has been negatives. there has been equal amounts, in my opinion. I'm an introvert. You might think this is funny, that I can stand on a stage in front of 1,000 people and talk about this, not a problem. But don't ask me to do the social networking bit afterwards. I literally go into shutdown mode. My brain doesn't know how to compute that. So for me, working like this has been amazing. I do miss meeting people. So there's loads of positives and negatives that we've all experienced. But in all of this, when people say, yeah, but no one's experienced it the way I have, what I am going to say to you is you're not alone. Because no matter what your experience of the last 18, 19 months has been, what that experience, whether you have experienced traumas within your circle, whether you have experienced loneliness by remote working because maybe there is nobody else in the house, whether it's juggling children, childcare, teenagers. Believe me, I have 2 teenagers and this has not been a fun experience. But in all of this, there's very few experiences in the world that everyone has. This is one of them. Our individual experiences in this situation are all unique, but we share a common ground. So when we've got, and I think because a lot of us have got quite weary, especially over the last few months, where we keep thinking there's an end in sight and then it kind of keeps being pulled back and going forward and pulling back. But this shared experience is giving us an opportunity to rethink the way we live our lives and work. Because there is no, and I'm going to talk about this work-life balance. And I know somebody said earlier that work-life balance they didn't like that phrase. I hate that phrase. I think it's absolutely appalling. So even though we're all feeling a little bit uncertain about certain things, about whether we go back into the office, whether we do hybrid, what's happening, we have a shared experience in this. And that's what bonds us. That's a collective. And that in itself is something that's really positive. So, and I think even with yesterday and today's news headlines, are we going back to the office? Are we not going back to the office? But for those of us that have already started with a hybrid model, some of us haven't. And some of us have been going into the office even because maybe there's no one else there, so it's easy for them to get in. So, but these are just some questions that we might be having. When will I get back into the office? How will I manage the commute? That's come up a few times because for some people that commute has been huge. And I don't know, for those in Dublin, I don't know about the rest of the country. One thing I've noticed is in the morning, if I'm out, I'm looking at the buses and there's nobody on the buses and the traffic is horrendous. Well, maybe we're asking ourselves, what flexibility will I have? What expectations will my manager have of me or my co-workers, my colleagues? All of these are things that keep us awake at night. Or they just slip into our mind during the day and suddenly we realize we've spent half an hour thinking about it and we don't have an answer for it. So how do we manage returning to the office? We've got life and work. Pre-pandemic, this whole catchphrase of work-life balance, whereas there is no work-life. There's just life. Some parts of life, we do certain things, and other parts of life, we do work. And some parts of life, we cook, we go for a walk. It's life. So with this hybrid working, and I know there was some questions that had come up earlier of how do we manage, and this is very, very generic picture, I apologize. Lots of people who work from home do not have babies. And also I do not look like that when I stand at my desk in a pair of 6-inch heels and a skirt. I very much have subscribed to the what is comfortable to wear at home. But here's some questions and to ask yourself, and to even ask others, that if you feel somebody is struggling a little bit. So really simple. How are you managing your stress? Remember, stress is good. Stress is important, as is anxiety. But how are you managing it? If you are a parent, how are you managing parenting and hybrid working? Are you eating well? It's funny, you'd think because we have access to our kitchens and the thought process pre-pandemic, God, I wish I worked from home because then I could be really in charge of what I ate. And yet we're literally sticking toast in the toaster or eating biscuits because we suddenly create no time to eat well while we're at home. We probably, in a way, nearly ate better when we were in the office because we made the time to make our lunches. Are your expectations unrealistic? I remember I wrote a piece for the journal at the beginning of the pandemic last March, and I talked about lowering the bar, not dropping the bar. It's not about dropping the bar, taking to the sofa and sticking Netflix on. It is lowering the bar, because when our brains achieve a goal, when we get to a certain target, our brains take that as a positive. If we are constantly have this bar of expectations placed so high that we're jumping all the time, one, it's exhausting. And two, what's impacting in our thought processing is, I'm never going to get there. So dropping the bar of expectation, hitting that bar and slowly inching it up is very different from setting that bar so high up that it's unobtainable. Prioritizing your sleep, I will talk about that. But these are just some questions that you can ask yourself in the transition into hybrid working, because I do think hybrid working is definitely something that is going to be here for a very long time. And some things to consider, and I think this is really important. Be patient. As equally, when we were told 18 months ago, grab your laptop and run, be patient in how you feel about going back into a working situation, being around people, creating space for processing and sense making. And whether it is, things like today, having those 5-10 minute breakout rooms, but having those meetings with a couple of people going, how are you coping? Having those discussions. Right now, we can't over communicate on how we're managing. And the more we over communicate, the more people know what's going on, and brings us back into that shared experience. And be honest about what you know and you don't. And I think this is very relevant for managers, is if somebody comes to you and says, what's happening? Don't fob them off with, well, it could be this. If you don't know, you don't know. As I said, over communicate. And don't ignore warning signs of distress. So if you're feeling overly anxious about something, find somebody within your working environment that you can discuss it with. Remember, twisting the jar. There's only so many times you can stab that on the top with a knife before eventually it gets tiring to do it. So don't ignore those warning signs. Other things, be prepared. If you are told, right, this is what our hybrid model is going to be, how are you going to do it? How's it going to work? Sit down, write it down. The act of handwriting, writing something into a notebook, as boring as it may be, rather than typing it in, allows you to brain dump, take all of that information out of your head, put it onto paper. And actually what happens then is it connects into us at a much deeper level than it does if we just type. So be prepared for whatever model is going to happen. Be compassionate. And this is not being compassionate to others. Obviously, we want to be compassionate towards others. This is more importantly being compassionate towards ourselves. Because if it's one thing that I have learned in all my work with dealing with people who have experienced or recovering burnout, is we are so hard on ourselves. As I said before, talk to colleagues and managers. Breathe. The only thing that you are in control of, I'm not in control of the behavior of my teenagers, my day, because anything could happen. the one thing I'm in control of is my breath. And my breath can reduce my stress levels. Won't get rid of them, but it can reduce my stress levels. I visualize it as turning the dial down on the radio. It can reduce my anxiety. Taking a few box breathing where you breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. And anyone who has any issues with their breathing or asthma, please be aware I would do it for 2 seconds rather than 4. You can build up higher, but if you have issues with asthma or any respiratory issues, just be very mindful. But box breathing also allows you to pause and take a step back from maybe reacting to something rather than responding. And again, I've slipped in get help because I'm hoping to tap into your subliminal mind and get you to realize it's okay to ask for help. And that help could be a colleague, it could be a friend, it could be a grandparent, it could be a GP, it could be a therapist, a coach. It doesn't really matter where that help comes from. It's about knowing when to ask for help. So, protecting your personal energy. Does anyone even know? I'm going to quickly zip into the chat what that box breathing, great to know the name, absolutely agree. I put the biscuit down when I was eating. No, eat the biscuit, eat the biscuit. This is your time to relax and eat the biscuit. But protecting your personal energy, what does that even mean? And funny, I'm doing a huge amount of work with a large corporate tech company in the States, and I'm hearing all the time the psychological safety. And I find it interesting because it's nearly become, along with all the other catchphrases, the psychological safety. And yes, it is important that we protect our psychological safety. But I would also say protecting your personal energy is really important. And by protecting your personal energy, some of the tips that I'm going to give you shortly are going to help you to do that. It's not always as basic as get up and put a coat on and that's going to protect your personal energy, but your 4 pillars all work to help you do that. And what happens when our personal energy is exhausted, if we're one of those people that gives and gives and gives and gives, we've got nothing left for ourselves. So in order to be able to give, we also need to be able to pull back and shut down. And I know there was talk earlier on the right to disconnect, and I know there's going to be more talk later. And I know it was, I think in 2017 in France, they brought in the law of the right to disconnect. And there was a couple of companies over the last few years that I have worked with that had already brought that in. For me, the right to disconnect in relation to protecting your energy is great. However, therefore, the responsibility lies on us not to sneakily go into our phone email app and check it and then have that with us all weekend of I need to do it. So there's a two-way, there's a responsibility of the company to create an environment where the right to disconnect becomes really important, but it also then for us to put those boundaries in place for ourselves in order that we're able to go at a certain time, whatever that time may be, that's it, I'm now shut down, and it's not playing over and over in your head. Managing morning anxiety, especially if it's getting back into a commute, how do you do that? So it's to start, before you even manage it, it's actually understanding, is it even there? Is what that feeling is. So managing morning anxiety, that's where being prepared, knowing what it is that you're doing that day, if that's a day that you're going into the office or that's a work from home day. Managing ourselves. There is something I used to say to my kids, and I've used it a few times in different presentations. There's an admiral he's an ex-admiral from the Navy SEALs in America, and he wrote a book. He has done a TED talk. I actually just can't think of his name off the top of my head, but he wrote a book which is all about making your bed. And that's his TED Talk. And the first thing they teach the Navy SEALs, before they throw them underwater, submerged with bricks around their ankles or anything like that, they teach them to make their bed, first thing. And in this, especially with my teens, when they were at school from home and they were in their rooms, I would go in, I had them, and it wasn't in a parental way, it was make your bed. So that it didn't matter when they left their rooms, they came downstairs for food, whatever happened in their day, it didn't matter if they didn't do their work or all those other things that were becoming stressors for them. It didn't matter, because every time they went back into their room, their bed was made. Because it goes back into that, if I achieve one thing, even if it's one thing, that allows your brain to believe it can achieve one more thing. And if we add all those small things, rather than trying to achieve the big thing first and being in utter chaos, we do it in small little steps. Positive communication. Another one of my bugbears is positive psychology. We are allowed to feel not great, but positive communication is where, rather than having this is all horrific and everyone's sitting around the water cooler having that not so positive chat, it's about being able to go, okay, this isn't going well. Let's brainstorm. What can we do that could be better? How can we change this? So that's what positive communication is. Positive communication is also simply communicating rather than internalizing it. And as I said before, right now, we cannot over communicate enough. I put this slide in twice, by the way, because I want you to really, really take this on board. Self-care, absolutely despise this term. As you can see from what I talk about, I'm not mad about the wellness industry's terms. I think they've been overused. I think therefore we don't take them very seriously. But self-care is not a bubble bath. Self-care is not a piece of chocolate cake. Self-care is not a glass of wine. A bubble bath is exactly that, a bubble bath. A piece of chocolate cake is very nice. A glass of wine, I'm sure for those that drink, I don't anymore, but I have found McGuigan's non-alcoholic, excuse me, wine, which is lovely. A glass of wine is a glass of wine. So self-care is none of those things. And it's been indoctrinated into us, oh, you know, I had a lovely bath, that was my self-care, and I lit some candles. That's just a bath. But what self-care is, self-care means asking yourself what you need on any given day and following through on the honest answer. So maybe your self-care is, I've had a crappy day, nothing went right, I need to go for a walk to clear my head, but actually I just can't be bothered. But you know that going for a walk is going to clear your head. Well, then that's following through on the honest answer. Maybe self-care is, I'm exhausted, I have a splitting headache, I actually just want to go to bed. I want to lie on the sofa and watch 6 episodes of something on Netflix. There's no right or wrong in this. There's no, your self-care has to be. It's asking yourself what you need, not what someone else needs, and then following through on the honest answer. I've already said about the box breathing and it's anxiety reducing. Now, when I talk about a lot of this stuff, whether it's going for your walk, whether it's your box breathing, whether it's going to be the next couple of slides I'm going to talk about getting your jam on. And I saw this, with full and utter transparency, is I was at a bank the other day, and I don't know what it was in relation to. There was a leaflet somewhere in this bank, couldn't even tell you the name of the bank, and I saw jam, and I went, I love this, because people, the kickback I get from people is, I don't have time to do X, Y, and Z. Finished a book last year called The 5 a.m. Club, which is successful people get more done in the morning. I'm a single mom. I have 2 teenagers, 2 dogs, 2 cats. And much as I love to get up at 5 o'clock, I'm then fit to go to bed at 6 p.m. in the evening. So it doesn't really work for my lifestyle. So how do you get all the good stuff I talk about and bring it in? Jam. Just a minute. Imagine you, throughout the course of your day, had loads of those little jams. So whether you're making a cup of tea and you do box breathing for the minute that it takes for the kettle to boil. Imagine you just stood up and shook yourself at your desk and got movement into your body for just a minute. All it takes is just a minute. We don't have to create these masses of time getting up at 5 a.m. in the morning, just a little bit of time. So boundaries to prevent burnout, and I'm keeping an eye on the time, is burnout basics. So a lot of you will actually know and maybe have read about, and I think it's become so prevalent in the news across all sectors, and as I said, the World Health Organization calls it an occupational phenomenon. However, this is another explanation, and I actually much prefer this. It's a state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion caused by long-term involvement. Now, generally speaking, long-term involvement is periods of 3 months or longer. But I actually think we hit that very quickly last year within a very short period of time. But it's caused by long-term involvement in emotionally demanding situations. I'm just going to say that again. A state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion caused by long-term involvement in emotionally demanding situations. It does not mean that you're tired. This level of utter exhaustion feeds into every part of you. It can happen with our workload, time pressure. When I say lack of support, I am not vilifying anybody, but the lack of support where we've been in that remote situation, and that support may have come from being in an office situation. Again, lack of feedback. And again, it's not about vilifying. It's about when we were in that work situation, in that office situation, we would get feedback much more organically. Or possibly it's even our values discord. We're just not aligned with what we're doing. One of the interesting things I think about the whole remote working and the option or possibility of hybrid working is the ability to nearly view the at-home work as our deep work, get head down and do our work, and using the office environment for meetings, for collaborations, for that social connection. So to have an idea in our head that we're embarking on it with 2 different expectations of what we're personally going to achieve or get out of both different environments. Juggling it all. And notice me, which is you, right down the bottom. So our obligations, our friends, our work, our family, extended family, all of these can contribute to burnout, because generally speaking, we try and juggle it all. And it's hard enough trying to juggle 2 things. And because here's the thing, and for every gentleman that is on today, I want to say you are let off the hook. This whole thing that women can multitask and men can't, nobody can multitask. The term multitasking was brought in to talk about how the back end of a computer talked to the other back end of a computer. And at no point were they actually doing the same thing at the same time. It was a split second. But when we as human beings multitask, what happens is we're doing task A, we think we're multitasking by doing task B, or somebody asks us to do it, and we have to emotionally disengage from task A to move on to task B, and then emotionally disengage from B back to A. So nobody, women or men, can multitask. There's also internal causes of burnout, personality type, whether we're type A personalities, those high achievers, perfectionism, imposter syndrome. And for those, and there's a high percentage of people who have onboarded into companies or departments and never met their colleagues and don't actually know how they feel or fit into an organization or a department, or whether it's a department of 3 people or 30 people. And feeling like they shouldn't be there. Also trying to control things that are out of our control. These are just some of the internal causes. So Burnout 2021, and I'm only going to list a few of these because you can see, and this is all recorded, is, you know, we've got COVID worries, family worries, misinformation and confusion, Zoom fatigue, which Stanford University did a piece of research which came out in September, and it is a thing. It's not just another little catchphrase, it is a thing. Trying to be engaged, make eye contact, for people who are introverts, who don't have the ability or the confidence to say something. Social isolation for those of us that have been working on our own, living alone. So all of these can contribute to burnout. There isn't any one area. So what does it look like? And I think for a lot of people, it depends. When you're looking at, by the way, severe burnout, people who have experienced it, there are people who, when I'm working with them, have been signed off work for long periods of time. But if you're starting to even feel, and remember, this is over periods of time. This isn't just the odd day where you have a tension headache. We're talking when this is continual. So muscle aches and pains, tension headaches, sleep disturbance, emotionally disengaged, increased alcohol consumption. There's been so many pieces of research from so many countries over the last 18 months on alcohol consumption. And last week, the 1st of November, I celebrated 14 years not drinking, which started off as giving up for a month. And that month has now become 14 years. But as I say, I always have a bottle of 0.0 wine in my fridge. Just found out Gordon's have brought out a 0.0 gin. So my Christmas is looking more interesting. But the increased alcohol consumption, if you're using alcohol as a perceived distressor, then, and it's something that's coming into your life on a more frequent basis, this is about just being mindful of it and being more aware. So in relation to this comment that was made earlier on work-life balance, this is my favorite slide, by the way, of all of my slides. Work-life balance is a myth. And there is somebody, I've created this person who lives in California, and they're sitting by their infinity pool, staring out to sea and the hills, and they're going ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. Because we have been sold this ideal that once we have work-life balance sorted, and that our lives are going to be enriched and fabulous and wonderful. But it's like the donkey with a stick out in front of his head and a carrot dangling down. We're constantly striving to get there. And we never get there because there are always going to be curveballs that are thrown at us on our days and our weeks, months, years. There's always. So instead of thinking of life, this work-life balance as a pie chart and it has to be all equal, how about we change that up and we think instead of counterbalance, living a counterbalanced life, because life is always in a state of flux. So counterbalance means there are going to be times where work is going to be busier and more important and there's deadlines. For accountants, it can be year end, for month end, for people working with exams. There's always going to be periods where one takes precedent over the other. The idea behind counterbalance is it shifts, is that if there was year end or month end every single day of the week, it would be like that and would be completely out of balance. but we're in flux. It changes. So sometimes life, our personal life, takes precedent, and sometimes work does. So when we start to allow ourselves to be kinder, that self-compassion, instead of trying to have it perfect, of I need to get to the yoga class or play football or play golf, need to have these, and if I miss them, then I haven't looked after this part of my life, but that it's all counterbalance. So getting rid of the work-life balance, because we just live life. And then the right kind of prevention. Prevention and recovery around burnout. They're the processes and activities which individuals replenish their key resources. And remember, this is why it's so individual, in order to look after your well-being. And those resources can be emotional and or physical. So I stuck this in, and I think this isn't nearly as relevant maybe as it was when we weren't allowed to fly anywhere, when we were literally not told to leave the island. But we still do it, and I still think it's really important. We have created an environment where we have what I call runaway recovery, where we work really, really hard, whether it's at home or whether it was office-based, work really, really hard, and then we go, but I've got my 2-week holiday coming up. So runaway recovery happens once or twice a year. It can be fairly stressful to get organized because you've got to get someone to cover your work, all of that. It doesn't address your root cause of your stress, and therefore you come back to right back into the stresses you already had. So it's a total avoidance of reality. Whereas if you look at your real recovery rituals, whatever you want to call them, whatever works for you, they happen daily. Remember, getting your jam on, those little things that you do daily. You can do bigger things once a week, even bigger things once a month. You can still have your runaway recovery, but having the daily rituals. So that makes your reality better, because you're not waiting until this 2 weeks to replenish everything. It creates healthy boundaries because you prioritize those moments for yourself. So you integrate it into your day. And then I'm going to skip through this because I'm really conscious of time and I want to leave time for Q&A. Actually, I'll say it: types of recovery: detachment, relaxation, and mastery. Last March 2020, people went straight into mastery and couldn't figure out why they were so exhausted. And mastery was like everyone making banana bread. I didn't make banana bread, but it went straight into what can I learn? What can I do with my time? But we didn't focus on detachment and relaxation. And detachment is mentally letting go of work during non-work time, that right to disconnect, which is really difficult when you're working from home, where you're not walking out of the office door, closing it, shutting down your computer and going home. When the computer is still at the kitchen table or just shoved over on a counter or beside your bed, wherever you've been working from, that detachment becomes harder to do. Therefore, it means we need to focus more on being able to do it. Relaxation is not just sitting watching Netflix or documentaries. Relaxation can be going for a run. It's low effort, something that you're already able to do that doesn't involve a huge amount of cognitive ability to be able to do. So the mastery is where you're learning something new, but we need to have detachment and relaxation in a really good headspace. So talking of headspace, just stick very quickly into the chat, just a yes, no, who does mindfulness? And while you're doing that, I'm going to explain why I asked this. So mindfulness, research driven, has been shown to reduce our stress levels, helps pain management, so many incredible things. And if it was a pill, we would all go to the health food store or the chemist, pop a pill, Bob's your uncle. But we have to put a bit of work into it. So I struggled when I was learning mindfulness. And for me, I had to create a way of bringing it into my world. So this is what I did. So for those of you that struggle with mindfulness, firstly, everybody here already does mindfulness. Whether you cook, whether you bake, whether you knit, sew, paint, run, walk, pet the dog, all mindfulness is being in the present moment, in the here and now. So it doesn't have to be an app, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. But I created this little chap. This is my purple alien. So every day when I go out for a 5 or 10 minute walk as a break, I don't bring my phone with me. I imagine this little guy lives in the sky. He can't see anything down here. So I describe every single thing I hear, see, smell. So whether it's a house for sale, the leaves turning a different color, doesn't matter what it is. Because while I'm doing that, I am fully present in the here and now. That's all mindfulness is. Very conscious of time. Your 4 pillars, these are not of recovery, these are prevention. These 4 pillars are key. Think of them as the 4 corners of your bed. Sleep, mother of all self-kindness. Nutrition, it's not a diet, it's eating to fuel your body. Exercise, it's about as much about rest as it is about going out and doing a 10K run. Exercise is about listening to your body. Sometimes if our bodies are under so much stress and our adrenaline is going so high and our adrenal glands are under so much pressure, we actually need to turn the dial down and just go for a 15-minute walk. So exercise is not about, oh, I don't do enough. It's not about going to the gym. It's not about trying to create a really, really busy existence. It's just about listening to your body. And clutter, the last of your 4 corners, clutter, it's not just the clutter around you, it's that emotional clutter, it's that internal chatter, it's that I'm not good enough, it's if I ask for help, I'll be seen as not coping or not good enough. So that internal chatter is as much clutter as the clutter around you. And as I've already said, the self-care, so I'm going to zip through this. And remember, this is my last slide. Your biggest thing in all of this is compassion, practicing self-compassion and forgiveness. So your key takeaways, they're there, and I know there's going to be a couple of questions put in, so I'm going to slip past them and I'm going to stop sharing my screen and stick myself back here.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Good stuff. Siobhan, how lucky are we? We were worried that a 15-minute session, people would start switching off and not paying attention until you asked that question about mindfulness. And quick as a flash, I think about 100 of our 150 attendees put in an answer. For the record, it was about 50-50. Although one person was very honest and just said not enough. That I thought was probably the most honest answer of them all. Because of all those no yeses and not enoughs, I lost track of what questions came in, but I do know that one came in from Kathy Hines, who leads up a lot of well-being initiatives in the university. And she asked a question that I can assume the only answer to it is yes, is that should large organizations like universities be focusing on, wellness inductions for staff, and providing those supports around wellness. But I might kind of drill down into that question and ask, for people who want to engage their teams in wellness, is there a particular time of the day? You mentioned morning anxiety. Is there a particular time of the week? Are there particular frequencies with which, are there clever ways to remind people to mind themselves if you were looking to organize a suite of activities or reminders for staff?
Yeah, I would. Great question. I would always suggest, and even when I work with clients, I would always suggest working anytime before lunchtime. And the lunch and learns, I totally disagree with, because that's somebody's personal time to have their lunch, and that's what they should be doing, not a lunch and learn. I think that was kind of pre-pandemic. It was a great model to get the conversation going. If you think of our brains as elastic bands, we get up in the morning and an elastic band is like just perfect, absolutely perfect. And through the course of the morning and lunch and late afternoon, that elastic band is being stretched further and further, because we're using our brains to decision make, problem solve, conversation, all of that stuff. So if we're putting in place wellness and well-being, all of those things late afternoon, anything from 2 onwards, people are exhausted. They've already kind of nearly tuned out. They don't have the bandwidth to be able, I always say as well, don't have serious conversations late in the afternoon, because it's, you know, we get more reactionary than responsive. So I would be suggesting to bring them in earlier in the day to than later on in the afternoon.
Thanks, Siobhan. And I have a follow-up question as well for you. Going right back to the root of the presentation, the title, Twisting the Jar, and your resilient mom knowing to ask for advice for a component. And I think we can all identify with that, because we work in teams in our universities. And sometimes when Mary lifts her eyes from the laptop, you'll ask a question to Mary because you know she knows this better than anyone. Or you'll go down to the staff canteen and see Paul in the corner. You know what, I might grab Paul and ask him to help me with this. In a remote environment, we don't have those visual cues or those random encounters. And I think we're all conscious of the fact that, oh, I bet you Mary and Paul are busy doing whatever they're doing remotely. So in that context, do you have any advice for staff in signaling that they're stuck and need help, or maybe for the audience today, line managers to kind of know the cues for maybe when their staff are stuck and need help twisting the jar?
Well, it's interesting. There's, and I'm very happy to share this with the team so they can share this in whatever way. There's a lovely, really simple one-page exercise. It's an NLP exercise, but it's how we communicate. So we communicate whether it's auditory, visual, kinesthetic, sensory, or emotional. Now, as much as, so this isn't about the introvert, extrovert, or the different colored hats. And this is more about how we get those cues off people when we were in a face-to-face. So if I were face-to-face with you, and now I know because I can see you at the side of the screen, but I know that you're looking at your piece of paper and you're going, how long more is she going to be? Because I need to move on to the next thing, because we pick up with those cues. We don't have that when we're on Zoom. But if we have an understanding, if we could do exercises so we actually understand how the people on our teams and are the people we live with, how they communicate. So if you're an emotional communicator and I am being very direct with you and you go off and I can see you're quite dejected, then I'm going to know that, oh God, would he not just do what I asked him to do? But if I understand that you're an emotional person, you have taken what I've said, you've taken it from the tone of my voice, as opposed to what I've asked you to do. If we have that greater understanding of how people actually communicate with each other, we're going to be able to pick up those cues easier, not perfectly, but easier through an online world.
Thanks, Siobhan. We sadly need to wrap up our Q&A there. I see some more questions coming in. Somebody says, what's a good toolkit for all these ideas? I would say Siobhan's book, The Burnout Solution, right? So all of these, you burst a few bubbles there around work-life balance, but you introduce new things around morning anxiety, runaway recovery, all these kind of new concepts that are new to me, I expect are new to some of our delegates. Are all those things explored further in The Burnout Solution? Good stuff.
Yep. There's loads of information in there, and you can follow me on Twisting the Jar, and I'm always... I'm challenging the way that the wellness industry has been portrayed.
Thanks very much. Siobhan, if you have a chance, would you have a look, see did any late questions come into the chat and maybe respond in the chat? How lucky are we to have Best Global Corporate Training Specialist 2021, Psychotherapist of the Year 2021, and best-selling author Siobhan Murray in our midst? Thank you so much. A really great session, and I feel we all benefited from that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, we're